Welcome to today's Explainer. So today we're diving into a really wild story. It's this perfect, almost crazy example of what happens when a deeply rooted tradition absolutely collides with modern reality. We're looking at a village that had this, well, incredibly stubborn winter habit. I'm talking about sleeping outside, on their roofs, every single night, no matter how freezing it got or how much the wind was howling. At first glance, it kind of sounds like a quirky, charming community thing, right? But as we're going to see, this absolute dedication to the past actually spiraled into a pretty dramatic and, honestly, dangerous situation. So I have to ask, who exactly sleeps on a roof all night in the dead of winter? I mean, seriously, it's a crazy question, but it hits the nail on the head regarding just how absurd this whole thing was. Just picture it. It's the middle of winter. Most of us are, layering up, grabbing extra blankets, cranking the heat. But in this specific village, their nightly routine literally involved dragging thick mattresses and heavy blankets all the way up the stairs to an exposed, freezing roof. The whole community would just gather up there under the open sky, chatting with neighbors across the rooftops before going to sleep. Now, the elders absolutely loved it. It was their cherished way of life. But yeah, not everyone was thrilled about turning into a human popsicle every night. And that brings us to this massive generational divide. To the older generation, sleeping up on the roof was basically the ultimate health hack. They were absolutely convinced that breathing in all that quote-unquote fresh air built up your immunity. For them, it was all about village tradition, keeping the family unit tight, working together, eating together, and sleeping together under the stars. But for the younger women of the house, the daughters-in-law, this tradition was a total nightmare. The reality for them was constant sickness from the freezing cold, getting absolutely eaten alive by these massive mosquitoes, and because the whole family was packed onto the roof just to share body heat, absolutely zero personal space. This really just shows you how painfully rigid this whole setup was. It wasn't just, a minor annoyance. It was a miserable daily struggle. Take Pollock, for instance. She was a brand new bride, and on the very first night, her welcoming ceremony, mind you, she finds herself banished to a freezing roof, just shivering all night while her new in-laws are snoring away like nothing's wrong. Or take Ritu. She literally fell down the stairs and twisted her ankle. She figured, well, finally I get to sleep indoors, right? Nope, not a chance. Her in-laws actually carried her up to the roof so she wouldn't miss out on all that healthy, fresh air. Seriously. Add in the cramped spaces, having heavy limbs of sleeping relatives draped over you, and the constant mosquito bites, these women were just totally exhausted. So, as you can imagine, the frustration was really reaching a boiling point. Payal, one of the daughters-in-law, really hit the nail on the head. She was furiously washing dishes in freezing cold water one day, and she just snapped, asking, what is the benefit of living in this house when nothing goes our way? And you really have to feel for them. These women felt completely voiceless. They were running the households, doing all the cooking, all the cleaning, but they didn't even have the basic right to sleep inside their own warm bedrooms. The elders just flat out refused to bend the rules. And, well, that kind of stubbornness, it completely set the stage for an all-out rebellion. Because, desperate times definitely call for desperate measures. The women realized pretty quickly that trying to use logic on their stubborn in-laws was a complete dead end. So they formed a sort of secret alliance. They decided it was time to get creative. The new goal? Sabotage the roof sleeping tradition completely and basically scare the elders into moving indoors. What actually happened, though, was a series of incredibly funny, yet completely disastrous attempts to break the habit. So their master plan unfolded in 3 distinct phases. Step 1 was just direct refusal. They straight up said, we're freezing, we're sleeping downstairs. But the elders shut that down immediately, pulling the whole family unity card. Okay, moving on to step 2. Fake ghost sounds. The women waited until everyone was fast asleep, then started playing spooky, haunted noises on their phones. Their grand plan was to convince the elders the roof was haunted. The result? The elders just snored right over the audio. Complete and utter failure. So finally, step 3, the fake snake. Payal actually tossed a rubber snake right onto her sleeping father-in-law. Naturally, he wakes up screaming and launches it onto the adjoining roof, where it lands on a neighbor. The neighbor wakes up screaming and throws it again. Eventually, someone turns on a light and the rubber snake is busted. In the end, the women still didn't get to sleep indoors. They just got a massive scolding for pulling a terrible prank. Right, so the rebellions totally flopped. The women just kind of resigned themselves to a miserable lifetime of freezing on the roof. But this is where the tone of our explainer really shifts. Because what started as this weird, quirky family comedy suddenly turned into a full-blown, village-wide medical mystery. An actual invisible threat started to take over the village. And no, it wasn't a fake ghost or a rubber snake. Real, severe health consequences were starting to pop up all over the community.
Remember how the elders were constantly bragging that sleeping in the open air built up your immunity? Yeah, well, the exact opposite was happening. Every single night, you could hear these widespread, severe coughs just echoing across the rooftops. Raging colds and really deep chest congestion became totally normal. And the scariest part was that high fevers were spreading like wildfire, really hitting the vulnerable ones hard, the young children and the babies. Literally, the entire village was turning into an open-air hospital ward. And that brings us to the real educational pivot of this explainer. What was actually going on here? Was it just the freezing winter chill causing this mass sickness? Or was this highly praised fresh air actually toxic? Now, the elders, of course, just blamed the changing weather. They figured it was a typical winter bug going around. But the sheer volume of sick people and how severe the symptoms were pointed to something way darker hiding in the night sky. The air they were breathing all night long was definitely not what they thought it was. Things got so out of hand that real medical professionals had to step in. The local doctor started reviewing the villagers' blood tests and health reports, and he was genuinely alarmed by the data. He immediately organized a campaign, pulling together his junior doctors and the village sarpanch, who was the head of the village, for an emergency meeting. The elders obviously were super skeptical. I mean, how on earth could this modern doctor tell them that their sacred, health-boosting tradition was actually poisoning them? Well, the doctor sat them down and introduced them to the very real danger of winter air pollution. He explained that during the colder months, there's this phenomenon where cold air actually traps heavy emissions, smoke, and pollutants dangerously close to the ground. It creates this incredibly toxic smog. The doctor told them, look, your ancestors absolutely did sleep outside in healthy, fresh air, but the environment itself has fundamentally changed. The invisible enemy that was attacking the villagers in their sleep wasn't the temperature dropping, it was the actual air itself. To make it crystal clear, the doctor laid out the stark difference between the ancient air their grandparents breathed and the reality of today. Back in the day, the village was completely surrounded by abundant trees and nature, pure, clean atmosphere. But today, winter brings massive agricultural fires, what's known as stubble burning or parali. You combine that immense amount of smoke with heavy vehicle exhaust, plus all the localized emissions from modern appliances that every single house now has, like ACs and TVs. The world had industrialized around them, but the village's habits, they hadn't changed one bit. So why does this matter so much? Well, it all comes down to human biology, specifically what happens to us when we sleep. The doctor explained that nighttime is absolutely crucial for your body to rest, repair itself, and flush out all the toxins you accumulate during the day. But by sleeping outside on the roof, right during the peak hours of winter smog, the villagers were literally forcing their bodies to inhale highly concentrated pollution for 8 hours straight. Instead of healing and resting, their lungs were working overtime just trying to filter out poison. This continuous night-after-night exposure was absolutely wrecking their immune systems, and it was the direct cause of all those coughs, colds, and fevers. Faced with undeniable scientific data and a literal health crisis staring them in the face, the stubbornness finally broke. It took an outsider with hard facts to change their minds. The village sarpanch stepped up and made an official ruling on the spot. He declared, "Our ancient tradition was fine for the old days, but with changing times and rising pollution, no one will sleep on the roof in winter." Just like that, it was over. The women who had suffered in silence and failed so miserably with their prank rebellions finally found relief, all thanks to environmental science. The roof sleeping tradition was officially banned. And that brings us to the biggest takeaway from our explainer today. Tradition is incredibly important, right? It grounds us, it connects us to our roots and our ancestors. But blindly ignoring modern environmental realities just for the sake of nostalgia, that can literally be fatal. The world around us is changing fast, and the air we're breathing right now is not the same air our grandparents breathed. It really makes you stop and ask yourself, what habits or traditions are we stubbornly holding on to in our own lives just because that's how it's always been done, even when the reality around us is screaming at us to adapt? It's definitely something to chew on the next time you step outside to catch a breath of fresh air. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will see you next time.